Thank you for joining me on this in-depth video guide to the Axiom trend chart. In this video, I will go through all of the different visualization and analytic options that you can perform in the Axiom trend graphs, and I hope you find it informative. If you have any questions, please email us info@canarylabs.com. To get started, I will connect to my historian. In this case, the machine name is Axiom Demo. I've done so out of Chrome, and I've been prompted for my login credentials. The first time that I come into version 19, which is the version I'll be demoing, it recognizes that I am new to the system, and it takes me through a series of tutorials. Particularly, this one is showing me the workflow change from version 18 to version 19. I can toggle between application and chart in the top right-hand corner. In this case, I'll stay with chart. I'm going to choose not to open one of my existing saved charts, but instead build a new one. Again, another tutorial welcoming me and walking me through step by step what each of the menus will do. So as we go through this, we'll just follow the tutorial's lead. I can add trends using this icon. Then I'll browse my trends, click the Add button. I edit my trends from this icon. I have the ability, once my trends are here, to select them and then change the properties on the right. And finally, I have a trash can icon to remove trends. So let's get started, and we'll go by the same steps. On the left is all of the different views and historians that I have access to. In this case, I'm going to be working within my manufacturing view, which is the donut line. I have three different lines of the donut manufacturing demo, and all of the tags are listed here. As I click on each individual asset, the tags are filtered. I'll be comparing flow to speed. So the trend graph that comes before me has been pre-configured by my own personal settings. I like to see 1 hour of duration. I do not ask the chart to go into live mode when it first loads. And it does show me the most recent time when I just loaded the chart. So we go from 1 hour, from 1:05 to 12:05 on today, May the 30th. On both the right hand and the left hand side, I have scales for each of the two trends. The trends are auto-banded, meaning that they sit on their own separate band, and those bands are scaled based on how many trends are on the chart and how much availability there is vertically on the page. I have several menu options here across the top. They include my hamburger menu, where I can open or save or create a new trend chart, as well as 4 different options where I can change options on my chart, my cursor bar, my legend, and my floating labels. Further down the page is my export feature to take all of this raw data and export it into CSV file, as well as my statistics, the ability to visualize assets and events, as well as a playback mode and an automated reporting section. The tutorials that come up from time to time can be accessed here, and my version and information is in the About section. All right, so let's just kind of talk about each component of the trend graph. First is the duration of time. If I'd like to move back in time, I can click and hold either the left or the right set of arrows. Left and right arrow keys also work. If I'd like to change the duration of time, I click, and then I use my time span picker. So I can select days, hours, minutes, or seconds, and I can also use hotkeys, D for day, H for hour, M for minute, and S for second. If I wanted 1 day of data, D1, and hit apply. I should note now that everything that you're seeing me do also works in a touchscreen environment. So it's the exact same interface whether you're on a tablet, a phone, or on your desktop. All right, so we've moved to 1 full day. Likewise, let's go ahead and move to 7 days. As that loads 7 days worth of raw data for both those tags, you'll see that there is a back arrow that allows me to undo the previous duration change. Additionally, if I wanted to zoom, I have several modes here. Currently we're in cursor mode, but I could come to a zoom mode that would allow me to isolate a particular area of the chart and come right to that area. Likewise, I can do it again. And you can see my duration is currently at 25 minutes. Again, I can step backwards, back to my previous duration. If I'd like to compare these two trends together, I have several ways I can do that. I could click on the scale and then choose to link the scale that I've selected to another scale, or in this case, both the scale and the band. So now both the trends will share the same scale and occupy the same band. I can break them apart by clicking once and then clicking a second time on the broken link. Notice that it does show me that it is the blue trend that is linked currently to this band. Now this time I'm going to link them together, but I'm going to choose only to link the bands, and that will respect the individual scale values of each, but it will set the two trends drawing directly over top one another. Again, I can break that apart. Now additionally, we can also modify the trend in more of an ad hoc manner. So I could choose to click, which highlights this blue trend, and then I can click and drag the blue trend up the page. Notice that when I do this, a new icon becomes available, and that's the auto band feature. So by clicking this icon, I'm able to reset the trend graph to where it was before. I can also grab the top or bottom edge of the trend and change the overall size of it. Again, the auto band feature allows me to undo that. And the last feature on the scales to talk about, that would be the ability to change the scales from the main trend. So if I right click, I get an edit for the scale range. There's several ranges here. There's an automatic, which is what it currently is in. There's also an auto min or an auto max. So in an auto min, it'll hold the minimum value automatically, in this case 22. But I can manually change the maximum value. Perhaps I always want to hold it at 100. Now as we move forward, the scale of 100 will change, but you'll notice that the scale of 20, as we get to some different data, will begin to adjust. In this case, I don't think we have enough fluctuation in the trend to see it do that. I can right click and put this right back into auto mode. One last feature to cover as we talk about scales, and that would be the spacing between the two trend bands. As you can see, there's just a little bit of space. You can kind of see it there with the double line. Under the hamburger menu, if I go to my options, with version 19, there is a new feature called auto band padding. Currently it's at 6. Let's make it quite large to demonstrate. And so if I do 20 pixels, now I can see a much larger gap between the two. Again, 50 pixels. And if I set it to 0, that's what I see. Now, while we are talking about the banding and the padding, we should also mention the way that we're drawing. So right now, if I come into, say, 10 minutes, and I'm in live mode, you'll see that we're drawing right off the right scale. It looks like there's about a 2 to 3 pixel pad between the live edge and the scales. I have another option here in version 19 under my chart options, and that's called my live scroll percentage. Currently that's at 0, which means I'm drawing right on the live edge. However, if I set that to 25, now I'll hold at 75% of the screen will be historic values, and it will fill to the right edge the remaining 25%. This is nice if you want to watch a trend chart fill in live data and you don't want any movement to confuse the operator or the controller's eye. Now when it gets the whole way over to the right edge, it will one-time flash and reset back to that 75-25% split. All right, let's talk a little bit about the legend down below. Currently we are showing our legend. I believe this would be in our grid format. I can look at my legend features and see that I'm in grid display and that I'll display as many rows as I have available. I'm going to add a few more trends so that we can get an idea of how the legend looks with more data in it. There we go. All right. I have some options here on the legend I'd like to show. First is if I click on the header, it will collapse the legend. And if I click anywhere on the legend bar again, it will expand it. But in the legend right now, you can see I'm displaying the name of the tag, the full path of the tag, the description, the scale range, and the last value. We have all of these as options where we can choose what we do and do not display. For instance, if I want to take the scale range off and the description off, I may find that I don't really want the name of the tag and the tag's path, so I could remove the tag path. And I might add something like engineering units and my sample interval. Now, if I wanted to shift the order of these things, I could do so. I could bring the last value in front of the tag name, for instance. I could also limit the number of rows that are visible. And so if I would choose 3, I'll pick up a scroll bar on the right-hand side. Additionally, I can switch the legend out from a grid to a key. And in the key, what you'll see is the list of the data color-coded in just one long linear line. It will wrap to the next line if you have more tags. And of course, I can collapse that as well. And finally, with the legend, I have the option to turn it off completely. But we'll switch it back to the grid and leave it on. Additionally, we'll talk about the cursor bar. The cursor bar is what I'm currently using to see the values over top of the trends. If I wanted to, I could click and hold the left mouse, and that would freeze all of the numbers. So they change now as I scroll. The cursor bar also has the same set of visualization options as the legend. If I come into the cursor bar, you'll see I can add things like path or absolute time. And again, I can change the order. I can also choose how many bands to display on the cursor bar at one time. If I choose 1, now whichever trend band I'm in, that's what I'll see. If I link 2 trend bands, I'm going to see the trend information that I'm closest to. Again, if I click, it'll lock that in place. Now, because I've moved away from the red and closer to the blue, it automatically updates. Likewise. I could also choose not to show the cursor bar at all. Last but not least, there's an option for floating labels. Let's go ahead and demonstrate how they work. To do so, I'm going to need to edit all of my trends at one time. So I'll come into my trend menu. I'll select all of the trends that are on the page, and I'll toggle on the floating labels. So for each trend, I now have a floating label that I can click and drag across and leave somewhere else. Again, floating labels give me all the same options. I could show aggregate and aggregate interval instead of last value. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the last set of options for the chart. Here's where I can place a title. Choose whether I want my bands to always be in auto mode, which they currently are. Or I can choose to put them in full mode where they would all sit over top of one another. Whether I want to see left or right scales. Should I leave the time bar available? Do I want to see annotations if they're present on the trends? And do I want to see grid dates? I have options on my vertical lines. Currently I have them set to a fixed count of 12. I'm looking at 10 minutes worth of data, so if I wanted to see perhaps one for every 2 minutes, now I'd have a new grid every 2 minutes. I'm going to put them back to line count. Same thing on my horizontal. Currently they're set with the scale ticks, but I could choose to make those pixel interval. Or for either vertical or horizontal, I could say no grid lines, please. All right, a few other things we can go ahead and show. If we go ahead and change our options here back to 0, that's my scroll percentage. I've got 10 minutes on the screen. If I'd like to see the statistics for that specific 10-minute section, for this case I'll just come out of live mode and I'll go back to 12 o'clock noon today. 12 o'clock and we'll go back 1 hour. So from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. I'd like all the statistical data on these tags. I now have available to me the drawing aggregate, the start and stop time, the number of samples in each of those durations, the validity, which is the percentage of good reads on the quality score, the total sum, the mean, min and max, as well as standard deviation with an N1 plus and minus. Finally, here I can also export all of this data. I could adjust my start and stop time if I needed to, and choose my sample interval. In this case, I'll stick with 1 second raw data, and I'll include the quality score. Creates a CSV file. If I clean it up, I'll be able to see all of the data as well as any quality information that was available to me. Looks like in this case I didn't have any quality score being passed, which would make sense because this is all generated data, which means it has no real context. Okay, so in review, we've covered all of the legend, we've covered our scaling options, we've covered all of our different options here. We will touch on assets and events at the end. Let's talk about playback and reports. Playback allows me to treat this entire screen like a DVR. So what you see down here at the bottom is a positioning bar that has become available to me. And I can choose when to start playback. I might do it at the beginning of the week at midnight. I can choose how long I want the total playback to be. Maybe a 24-hour period would be fine. And then how fast do I want to update the data on the screen? So I'm watching 1 hour of duration. Okay, and it's starting here at midnight. And I'd like to upload a new chunk of data in 15-minute intervals. And play that forward. And so what you'll see is my data is updating every 15 minutes as it comes across the screen. And I'm watching the duration play back for 24 hours. At any point I could stop this, can move to a different point in time. I can even add trends, even though I'm in playback mode. Here I added a string, so it's telling me what type of donut we were manufacturing. To leave playback mode, all I have to do is hit the exit at the bottom right. The last feature to show would be our automated reports. The automated reports, again, will walk me through the tutorial, but I'll give you a quick overview of how this works. The first thing I'll do is I'll schedule something to run. So in this case, if I wanted to save this, and I'll just save it in my own private folder. I can choose to run an automated report. Now I need to pick what I want to visualize, in this case the graph I just saved. How often do I want to be able to do that? Do I want to do it every day? Do I want to do it once a month? Or do I have some advanced settings that I'd like to run? Let's do it every other day during the week, and we'll ask for this to be ready at 6 a.m. Here's where I can set in my optional email. So if your email service has been turned on in the admin, which happens under the messaging panel, you can submit here an email list of who you'd like this chart to go to. And every day at 6 a.m., Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, it will capture this image. So if it's a lifetime chart set to 1 hour, that means essentially what you would have had in your email box this morning would have been this display. It would have captured it at 6 a.m. The chart was saved in 1 hour of duration, and you would have received this as a PNG in your inbox. So you can create multiple examples of this. Once they start executing, when 127 comes through here in a little bit, it'll execute. And then under the viewer, we'll have a picture of that trend graph. So I need to put this in live mode and save it. We'll wait on that. In the meantime, let's go ahead and start to review a few more of the mode options here. There's also a delta feature. The delta feature allows me to create a left and a right line on the screen. So if I click and drag, I create my left and my right edge. And what you can see is the difference between the value on the left edge and the right edge. In this case, it looks like 0.45, and the time span. Now, because my chart's in live mode, it continues to update. If my chart was not in live mode, I'd have a fixed set value. Again, I click and drag. And it's the difference between the left and the right cursor lines. Then finally is the annotation feature. With an annotation, I can click on the trend graph and I can make notes that get written back to the historian. When I do that, it does capture both the date and timestamp as well as the user information of who left that annotation. Let's go ahead and check on our report. And we can see the report that ran. There's the PNG file. It went 1 hour back of 1:27 p.m. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a new trend graph. And we're going to work again with our donuts, and we'll do flow twice. So I'm going to add it, then I'm going to add and close the second time. So I have the exact same data, looking at 1 hour. If I right click, I'm going to open up the trend menu, same as hitting this icon. And I have my first flow, which I'm going to call current. And then my second flow, which I'll call historic. In this flow, I'm going to choose to do a couple things. One, I'm going to make that line a bit thinner. And at the same time, I'm going to thicken this line. Now on my historic flow, I want to time shift this back 1 full day. So I've time shifted backwards 1 day. That means if I look at my cursor bar and put absolute time on it, I can see that here on my right side, I'm looking at today's date, May 30th, live data or near live data, and on the right side, I'm looking at the same data from yesterday, same time, 1:28. Of course, I could link these two and compare them over top of each other and see what type of variance I have visually. But it might be cleaner to just run a calculation of the difference between the two. And so again, if I come into my trend menu, I have an icon right here at the top that allows me to create a calculation. Now for my equation, I'll use the absolute value function, and I'll say current minus historic. I now have a new trend. As I move back in time, the data backfills. If I move to a live edge and say look at 30 minutes, the data also runs in live time as it's calculating. Once I've created a calculation, it is available for me to create more calculations. So in this one I'll just call it logic. And we'll use an if statement and say that if the difference of those two is greater than 0.15, then I'd like to draw a 1. If not, I'd like to draw a 0. Now I have a pretty simple way that I can visualize any time that my difference between the historic value and the live value is outside of a 0.15 variance, and that would just be by watching the discrete value that I'm writing behind this trend. If I wanted to make it a little easier to see, I could perhaps come down this new tag that I'm writing could come down past the scale and the bands and the formats, and I could come to the high limit and just tell it to fill if it's over a 0. And let's change that color to something that maybe is a little lighter. I think I'll go ahead and change that tag's draw color to match. So now I can look at my trend graph and immediately tell if I'm running outside of the variance that's acceptable to me based on where I was yesterday. Now I don't need to continue to visualize these other two, so I could check both of them and just ask it not to show the trend. As I change the duration, again, H for hours, and we'll look at 4 hours. I'll see everywhere that I was outside of that variance. All right, let's start over. I'm going to take all of these and delete it. And let's go ahead and now we'll run a comparison between, say, flow and speed. I'm going to look at a large amount of data. We'll say 30 days. It's going to take a little bit of time for that all to load. It is all 1 second data. So now that it's loaded all 30 days worth of data, I'm beginning to see that I've got more values than I have pixels to display. There's about 3 million values per trend right now that are being calculated and averaged over the about 1,800 pixels that my monitor supports. I have an option though. I could come in on that and choose, maybe I'd like to see every 1 second a minimum maximum value. And now it's going to, instead of drawing the average for each pixel, I'm going to see both the high and the low value. So I can see that my control was really all over the place. Again, this is all demo data, so that's why. But what I can see is clearly, and there's some areas where my range was not that high in all of those values. If I come back into a more realistic time frame, based on the resolution of the data, there's a better picture. So there's more than just this one type of aggregate, and I can change the interval. And as I change the interval, so if I went to perhaps every 5 minutes, what you'll see is starting at midnight and moving in 5-minute increments, it's now drawing it based on that 5-minute window of time. So if I come in here and look at, say, just 30 minutes, it'll be a lot more clear. There's a 5-minute chunk, there's a 5-minute chunk, another 5-minute, and so on. Additionally, beyond just that aggregate, I could also add the average back in using the minimum maximum time average. So I would see the range of both high and low, as well as what the average value was of all the sums inside of that 5-minute time bucket. There's a lot of different aggregates I can pick from. Now I'm down on the speed. And for speed, if we just review some of the options, I could do a count, which would tell me the number of raw values during the interval. So every 1 minute, it's now telling me the number of raw values. You can see it climbing as the current minute gets ready to expire. There, and so that minute bucket ended at 1:38, and I could see that I had 24 values during that 1 minute. Additionally, I have delta bounds. Delta bounds tell me the difference between the beginning of the interval and the end of the interval's value. So the first value at the beginning of the minute minus the value at the end of the minute. So now I know that I had 0.97 as my delta from this read to this read as far as the time bucket is concerned. Let's add that back in. That was my speed tag, just for a bit of context. So this is not going to give it to me exactly because I won't line it up perfectly, but it's close. So it looks like on the yellow band I had a value change of about negative 0.86 in that bucket. And what it actually was, if I could get into the raw values, was negative 0.91. All right, let's take a look at a few more. If I had a quality score, this would tell me in milliseconds how much time I spent in a bad quality read versus a good quality read. If this was a discrete, it would tell me in milliseconds the amount of time that the value was non-zero or state zero. Inbound tells me the value at the end of the interval. There's a maximum, a minimum, min-max, min-max time average, a number of transitions on a Boolean, good quality, another quality reading. What was the percent of bad reads versus the percent of good reads? A range. What's the difference between the high and the low value? The min and the max. So if I look at an interval where I have a lot of spike here, I can see that I had a much higher difference. And finally, I have some standard deviations, some time averages, totals. If it's a flow, what was the total per 24 hours, or the total per hour, the total per minute? This is based on what is the tag itself calculated for. If it's a 24-hour, like a gallons per day, maybe in a water treatment facility. Then if I'm measuring, say, an hour time bucket, this is going to tell me what is on pace to do based on the 24-hour aggregate. And then finally, we have variance of population and worst quality reads. All right, so that's going to walk us through pretty much everything that's available to us in this top section. Under the scaling, we've already talked about the ability to auto scale or have an auto min or an auto max. So if I wanted to have my speed always hold at an automatic max, but set the min to always be -10, that's what you'll see update on the scale. The top will adjust based on value, but the bottom will hard fix. I could also choose to set this speed according to the scales of another tag. And so to do that, I just select which tag I want it to match scales to. In this case, I'll do flow. So now whatever flow has is what I've matched. Flows from 4 to 0, and I've matched that with my 4 to 0 here. I'll set everything back to automatic. I do have the ability also to use a logarithmic scale. I don't really think I have anything here that has a high enough value to see any benefit there, but you do have that option. I could manually set the bands. We don't believe that you'll be using this feature very often since you can now just do it here from the screen. I can change to maybe scientific notation and ask it for 5 digits or up to 5 digits. It won't display it if the digits aren't there. Or decimal, or just general. The scales are smart, meaning if the precision is not necessary, it won't show the decimals on the scale. So for instance, from 3 to 3.5, because that's the auto scale, it's using 2 decimal places because it knows you would want that precision. But if I set this from 0 to, say, 100, now because there's no real precision based on the scale range, it's not going to try to put decimals here. it really helps to keep as much of the screen available for trending instead of shifting all of this to the left. And as we continue to move down, past banding, past formatting, we get to our high and low limits. And I think we'll go ahead and just set this up on the yellow trend. So if I would like, I can set a high limit. I can do it at a fixed value. We'll use 24. And I can choose to change the color, as well as fill the area. I can do the same thing for a low limit. If I set the low limit below 23, I'll change the color and fill the area. And then I can create multiple limit lines as well. All right. At this point, I think we've walked through pretty much everything that we're going to see. We've saved assets and events for last. The last thing maybe just to mention here, if you come to this right where your username is, you can log out. You can change your own user preferences. This means that when you open a trend chart for the first time, that's a new trend chart, not a pre-saved one, you can determine how you want that to show. We have several themes you can choose from. I'll go ahead and switch this theme now to light, as well as the third theme, which is Canary. But I can choose that every time I open a new chart, I might want the duration to be 30 minutes. I might want never to have left scales, always to be in live mode, never to show vertical grid lines, to run a legend in a key with just the name of the tag and the last value, that the cursor only shows on the one trend that I'm hovering over and it gives me the path. So once I set all of that up, I just exit out. The next time I log out and log back in, when I open up a new trend chart, those are the new settings that I'll have when I start a new trend chart. All right. So to finish up, we will do a new chart and we're going to bring in asset information. So if I open up assets, I'll have all the asset models available to me. In this case, we'll stick with donut lines. I'll see the type of asset that's underneath of that asset model. I only have one type of asset here, and that's called a line. If I had multiple assets, I believe oil field is an example, I would then choose my sub-asset. I can pick which lines I'd like to trend. We'll do the first two. The one I star will be the thicker drawn trend line. And then I pick the tags I want to compare. So by doing these three, what I expect to see is a top band with 2 tags of flow, a middle band with 2 tags that are level, and a bottom band with 2 tags that are speed. Notice it's followed my preferences for my new chart, and that's exactly what I have. When I look at my cursor, now I'll have to change it because I changed my preferences, and we'll look at the path. The top are my 2 flows, in the middle are my 2 levels, and the bottom are my 2 speeds. I can go right back to my asset and choose to add in one of my other assets and hit apply. And now I have 3 on each band. Again, if I change the duration of time and do any other functionality within the trend chart, it all holds true. Again, under my asset model, I could change the star, and now the yellow line will be drawn thicker and take precedent. So now you've seen the asset model and how that works. The only thing we haven't talked about today is visualizing events. I think we're just going to do a secondary video on that. It can be 15 to 20 minutes worth of material, and this one's getting a bit close to an hour. So thank you so much for diving deep into Axiom version 19 TrendGraph. If you have any questions, Again, email us, info@canarylabs.com, or if you need a scheduled demo, we'd love to help you with that. Look to the description for a link, or perhaps on the page that you're viewing this video. Thank you, and we appreciate your interest in Axiom.